Welcome, everybody. I am still having a little bit of a challenge with the technology here, um, but I would like to do this through Zoom, but I haven't figured it out. So I don't know if anybody is watching and can give me some instructions. But anyway, um, I want to do our third podcast. This is Darlene Rollins, and I'm beginning this YouTube video blog podcast now for Earthwalk Ways. Um, and this is concerning everything about our sacred story, our soul journey here on this amazing mother planet, the Earth. And, so it is a podcast that is dealing with all kinds of things, like how do we best walk in harmony and balance? Um, what is the purpose of coming here in the first place? How did we get here? Why do we have such amazingly, different characteristics and different lives here on this planet? All of these things, I think, are sort of these deep questions, especially about our own unique journey and everything that we're experiencing while we're here. So um, I have spent many, many years studying this as well and having these questions deep in my heart. So this is where we're uh, beginning, and I have done a couple of other podcasts of introductions, so check them out. And then join me here. This one is again on the sacred story soul journey that I believe is the foundation of this earth walk. And that, of course, is a word that, implies that, we are here on earth doing this sort of soul journey, this walk. Many indigenous peoples understand this in a way that I think we've lost this in the West. So we're just going to take a bunch of different options of, how to explore this whole theme. And I want to particularly focus on some beautiful thoughts and words from the Pathwork Guide, but we'll get into more of that in a minute. So I just want to, allow you to follow this a little bit as we are tuning in. And so there's this one other piece of sharing that I always like to do on my station when we start, and that is just kind of working with the medicine wheel as we are experiencing it. And the whole journey right now, as we understand this, we're in this medicine wheel process of the seasons, the sacred journey of life, both around the sun, right? And then also the turning of the earth, the cycle of the day it includes. And then it includes the cycle of all of life, a whole lifetime journey. So it's a very beautiful way of understanding things. And we will talk a lot more about the medicine wheel in the future. But basically, this is going to be covering all things soul journey. And here we are coming into October of 2025, and we're in the direction of the West, the season of fall. And this is representing both our place and our direction on the journey around the sacred medicine wheel of the year. And particularly, it follows, sort of the universal medicine wheel that's based on the Northern Hemisphere. And so this will make most sense for those of us that live, often in a forest that, goes through the four seasons. But the four seasons are a beautiful metaphor of the journey of life. And so we'll talk about that a little more. And here we are, fall, it's a time of harvest, of completion of the year. You can see it as a reaping of everything that we've sown, and of course that used to be the agricultural products that would help us survive over the winter, and setting up our stores, and saving our seed corn, that kind of thing. Um, but can also be metaphorical, right? And even in the Bible, Jesus often spoke of nature metaphorically in this way that, we learn again to recognize within ourselves. So it's a time of looking at the the journey of the soul's evolution over this year, and harvesting the good that has come from that, as well as some of the difficulties, maybe, the kind of karmic lessons or, other things that, are helping instruct us. And it is a time of a kind of completion for a period of time, a cycle that we've been undergoing. And I think most of us recognize that 2025 has been a very powerful and strong and kind of questionable cycle of what we're going through. But again, I think everything is happening in this larger context, both collectively and individually, of this sacred soul journey. So this is also a time, for the way of seeing in the West is the looking within, right? So in each of the directions, there's a certain way of seeing. And so the West is this form of introspection, which is the learning from our experiences. And it's also a time of preparation for going into the winter, into the direction of the North. And again, a time to set aside the stores for the winter and saving the seed corn that we would use in the spring. It's obviously a time for celebration and Thanksgiving and kind of a final community gathering before the deep winter sets in. So this is the kind of possibilities that, we have in the winter time, or in this fall into winter time. And so as we go forward on this new platform, I'm hoping that we'll make our journey of circles within circles and dance this medicine wheel and make our soul journey together, right? And I do believe that it is both collective and personal, and can inform us and can help as we go. So last time we spoke of the deep listening, soul whispering, natural communion, and how we need to integrate and be in the space of being with everything. The way we accomplish this is through our soul journey. In my lineage, it is understood that we embody our soul in this earthly dimension, and that we are, in fact, vast beings who have come here sometimes many times, and we are basically on a journey of evolution of consciousness. And this will happen most profoundly when we are here in this material, bodily, physical experience of life. But life does not end with the physical body's death. Our soul does continue on, and has many other experiences. And a part of the purpose of all of our journeys and all of our experiences is this process of integration, which is definitely a process of the direction of the West. So there's an unseen mystery that can only be intuited in hindsight, or sometimes at the moments when there's a sort of great aha, which comes to us and we make a connection we hadn't seen before. Um, and so then we begin to recognize in life, that things are not necessarily random, or, there's a kind of synchronicity and a kind of cause and effect that it takes a depth of understanding sometimes to recognize completely, because so much of it is hidden in our unconscious. So there's a way that a lot of what we're experiencing in life is being projected, but it's not that we're conscious of it at the time. But that's a part of what the journey is about, is to bring more consciousness to all of our areas of unconsciousness. So, again, the unseen mystery is within us. It's all around us. There is sort of this first person, second person, and third person aspect of the divine, right? There's the presence of the divine within us. There's the presence of the divine that's beyond us. And then there's the presence of the divine that is flowing through everything. And when we can recognize that, and see and get this understanding of what's happening, and what's behind all of that, and what its ultimate point is, there's learning and service in all of these things. So even my father, like, felt the touch of fate in his life, because he always used to tell me that, he was always, it was like a miracle the way that he had met mom. And for him, that was a confirmation of faith in a benevolent universe that was, conspiring basically to help us grow and bring forth our love and our service. So you might take a look at, in your life, there's the concerns and the joys, there's the challenges and the process of what we call in this work the descent, the going into the underworld, and ultimately that's to find the power of the underworld in within, like, our navigation to meet and go through and understand and transform what we meet there, brings us, out of that with a greater capacity, a greater depth of wisdom. And so, in a way, this descent journey, is part of, again, this metaphor for incarnation on the earth. Our vast powers as spiritual beings are limited here, and here our limitations, cause oftentimes the struggles and the issues that befall us. And yet it is in meeting those as best as we can, um, and trusting that they're here for a reason. They are our teachers, and that, in that way we can, continue to grow and develop, and even transform our lives here into, the the inner vision that we each carry. And again, it sometimes doesn't always look exactly like we imagined it, but it will come to us in ways that are even better than what we had imagined. So this is a journey, a soul journey, a journey of self-recognition, acceptance and understanding, and then also self-responsibility, right? And it may be that we don't know how to, quote unquote, control. That word is a problematic word for me, but we don't know how to manifest, exactly, but we can look at what we are manifesting, and we can also look at within us, where our frustrations, our fears, our negativities lie. And it's not necessarily in just trying to deny and rise above all of that I know is kind of a popular way of working in our time. But I think there's some of that is good, but I think there's a lot that we miss when we don't do our descent. So, and even in this tradition of mine that we call the path work of self-transformation, it's channeled material, and we'll be reading from that in a few moments. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But in each life, according to this path, we basically choose to incarnate for reasons. We came to bring our gift into the world, and we also selected some unfinished business that is part of our experience, where maybe we haven't resolved, or we, have some untruth in our understanding of something. And so when that happens, we actually bring those issues back with us, so that we work on those while we're here as well. So it's kind of like we have a life task, which is to bring our gift into the world, and we have a personal task, which is to, help resolve some unresolved, integrate some unintegrated aspects of our own psyches that maybe we sort of got lost in another lifetime, or A lot of it is based on our beliefs and our understanding that we draw conclusions from our experience. And oftentimes those conclusions are limited because we can't see the entire understanding of the whole thing. And so based on, what we know at the time, we make these limited conclusions, and then we often generalize from them. And so that's where we sort of get lost in the world of illusion or the world of our own mental products, because we're projecting from our history and bringing our past into the present. And my understanding is really we're learning to just be in the present and allow the divine expression of that moment to moment. So we've got a ways to go, but that's where we are in our journey. And it's a beautiful journey, and every little step we take, the more life and light and love do we have available and in our lives, and the more resilience and capacity we have to meet the challenges and the difficulties. And I think that we are in a time where we will be facing many of these. So this work is sort of imperative right now to help us find our way through this part of our journey. So, there aren't any meaningless lives. We are also bringing forward in our issues, right? Oftentimes, lineages. The trauma of our lineage, of our ancestors, and the collective trauma and negative energies that kind of were imprinted in their epigenetics in their lives. And so it's passed on, and it's also passed on spiritually in ways that I don't think we fully understood. So a lot of what we brought in, we brought half from our mother's side and half from our father's side, and we are the place to bring that together and to integrate it. So I wish to read from a selection of quotes from the Pathwork, a body of channeled material that came in during the late 1950s. And this was channeled by a woman by the name of Eva Paracas, and she passed away in 1979. There are some 258 lectures and then additional question and answer material, and it forms the conceptual body of the spiritual path that came to be known simply as the Pathwork. I discovered this when I was 34 years old, and I have always found it extremely helpful to use for navigating this spiritual journey we call life. And I call these lectures and the materials that are, written and have been transmitted, they're like maps that we can then apply, because each individual is a unique territory that needs to be explored and clearly experiencing itself, but the maps really can aid us in the navigation. So I'm going to, read and comment on some selections taken from various lectures of the Pathwork. So hopefully this is still working well. I'm going to switch over and just read some quotes, and then I'll come back and comment on them. So this is a composition of different guide quotes on this question of the sacred story and the soul journey. So this section is called The Real Self, or the God Within. And the Pathwork Guide speaks in this way. He says, he, she, they say, the analogy often used in dreams, as well as in other symbolic language, is that one's sojourn in a human body is a journey. This analogy has often been made throughout spiritual history. It reveals a profound truth. The inner path is in constant movement through the stages of soul matter that have to be traversed. This journey is not just a metaphor. It is a constant flowing movement, and so is your own personal path. It is a movement. It carries you through your landscapes. But the task you have come to fulfill, if it is left behind, you get stuck and you stay in the landscapes of those aspects of your consciousness which have not yet united and integrated with the real self. So, we're moving in this direction of integration of the real self, and where we are unable to do that, or, unwilling for whatever reason, where we're not conscious that that's what's trying to happen, we end up kind of recreating often experiences and circumstances and situations, again, not identical, but the underlying essence or feeling or theme is the same. And we begin to sort of recognize this over time, as we get older. Of course, by the time you're an elder, you see, these patterns surfacing a lot. When you're younger, you're still sort of exploring them for the first time, and oftentimes you're not really expected to realize that there's something more here, but they will come back. And this is not a bad thing. We sort of get frustrated and want to, reject or uh, make ourselves change this thing. But again, it's here for a reason. And so if our approach becomes adversarial with it, it often makes it, much, much more difficult. So partly what we are trying to do is, I think I mentioned this in our last video, look at how to actually uh, access this aspect of consciousness within us that is most accessible to us, just, as personalities, as egos here on earth, that is this open, curious, and compassionate consciousness, right? And so it's noticing patterns, it's noticing feelings of stuckness, it's noticing, where the landscape seems to just be staying the same or recreating itself with, different people in different places, but the same essence. And then that noticing, like is oftentimes we recognize it, and then we get frustrated with ourselves, or we turn against ourselves in this, and then that adds another layer of difficulty. So what we want to try to do is not merge or resist with whatever we're noticing in ourselves. And that will then allow us to integrate with the real self, this unintegrated material. So this came from lecture 211, this quote. And I'm going to read from another lecture now, a few more things. So he says, deep inside your nucleus is an infinite essence. This inward essence is eternal life, eternal reality, eternal beauty, limitless wisdom and love. But although your outer consciousness is connected with the essence, it ignores this fact and seems to be disconnected from it. You seem to be an isolated piece of consciousness. This is what makes life appear so frightening, and why your outer consciousness is blindly groping its way back to its connection, a connection with the total self. Your outer consciousness will eventually gain awareness of this connection, because the connection was never really broken. It only seemed broken from the vantage point of the limited outer consciousness. So this reminds me of one of the images that the guide has offered about, this full presence of consciousness, expanding out into the void, into, further reaches of, potential and possibility. And so as it goes out so far, it seems as if it loses connection with itself. And so then we have this experience of a disconnection to the whole, to the much larger nature of who we are. And yet that's a temporary state that's kind of like, made for souls who are great adventurers. So I want to invite you all to see, if you are here on earth incarnated in this way, that, at some level, you have a very adventurous nature, and you are here, to really explore all these facets. And so, when we go out and we get lost and separated, that I think, activates aspects of self that we wouldn't ordinarily have experienced or expressed. And then it's for our discernment, it's we have free will. And so if we were never to feel the call to, you know, act in opposition to sort of our deepest nature, we wouldn't, really have free choice. So in some ways, like, all of this is just a part of our learning curve, part of our education. Um, I remember a long time ago reading a book called The Education of Oversoul 7 by Seth, and it had, many similar kinds of themes. But basically, we want, to keep bringing back together all of these fragmented aspects. So I'm continuing to read in the same vein. The task of every fragmented, apparently disconnected aspect of consciousness is to realize its true identity and connection with the real self. This happens through an often laborious groping search, through attempts of the mind to expand its own narrow limitations. The mind holds this potential for expansion. Even in its disconnected state, it contains every aspect of divine reality. Using this potential depends only on which way the mind turns, which way the will directs it, which thought the mind chooses in any given instant. So this, also is, popular in the way of, like, being conscious of what we're thinking. And then, often we think of choosing as just, oh, I don't want that choice, that thought, so I'm going to put my attention elsewhere. I'm going to rebuke that thought. I'm going to not think that thought. And for some people, this is, can be effective, and can be, with practice, more effective. And yet, I think there is also other ways of, choosing, right? And so, again, this way that I find most useful for me is this form of integration work, where I am conscious that that's, not the thought or the feeling that I would choose, but it, in a way, is possessing me in this moment. It in a way, is present here. It wants my attention. It has something to say to me. It has a message for me. And so I find, rather than trying to just reject it, send it away, not try to pay attention or listen to it, it's not always the total answer. And there's another step that often works very powerfully for me to, truly just turn to it and deeply understand what its message is. It seems, when that is provided, it feels like, its mission is accomplished, and then it can shift. And I often feel, uh, quite experienced inner shifting energetically, and then following up in behavior and other aspects in my life from this process. So again, we're trying to see that this is part, of our journey here, and part of our work. And we don't need to judge ourselves. We don't need to, try to control ourselves in a degree that the kind of consciousness of this world, the egoic teachings that give us. And I think they tend to cause us to kind of lose some consciousness in the process, while, maybe they have some usefulness. To the degree that we are trying to suppress anything, I think it only goes into the body. And then in the body, it will continue to present itself some form or another. Ultimately, I think, through our physical health and potential death. So I just really recommend that we work in this way of coming to presencing, and, understanding and acknowledging all of these aspects within us. So reading again from the lecture. The fragmented aspects of consciousness, of divine light, because all consciousness is divine light, even if it's negative consciousness, right? It couldn't exist. It has an essence of light. It's gotten distorted. It's gotten twisted in some way. There's to me, most of our thoughts have both distortion and divinity. And so that's a part of what we're trying to do, is not just reject a thought, but discover what's true within it and what's not. And when we can do that, then we will have, like shift for ourselves in our evolution and growth. So, again, the fragmented aspects of consciousness of divine light, which seem to have lost their connection, float around in space. These aspects become personalities. Such personalities develop problems because of their apparent disconnection. The word problem is in accord with today's vocabulary. In other periods of history, other words have been used. Sinfulness, there lots of things have been, used to uh, describe the difficulties in consciousness that we often have, criminal behavior, that kind of thing. But most of us are in a kind of state where we're not going to act out to that degree, and yet there's very subtle forms of our inner disconnection and that create our problems in life. And in some ways, because it is a disconnection, I mean, sin is basically a word that means miss the mark, right? Or didn't connect. And so the idea is, again, not something that is morally repugnant as it has been in the past, but more that, we are acting in misconception, in confusion, in separation that is not real ultimately. And so separation, I think, is another way of understanding the source of all sin, is our lost connectedness. Okay, so back again to the Pathwork Guide's voice. He says, they say a total entity, a complete entity, is one that is completely aware of its divine nature. That is in possession, total possession of divine wisdom and energy. You are all total entities, but your manifest consciousness with which you identify is an aspect that your total entity seeks to reunite with. This can happen only when the fragmented aspects of your manifest consciousness make themselves compatible with the nature of the total consciousness. And I believe that this total consciousness ultimately is what we would call Christ consciousness or divine consciousness. Buddha nature, I don't know. It's like, I think there are maybe subtle differences, but ultimately we're all pointing to one thing, and it is a shift in our sense of separation back into a unitive connection with all of life, with each other, with ourselves, most primarily with ourselves, because the others I don't think can happen without that first. So so again, reading a little further, he says, they say, for the many years I've studied this path before we had this more consciousness around the genders, and I was always a little bit aware of it, but I just kind of adapted. Okay, so Eva, the channel, referred to this being as a he, and yet the guide actually said that there was a collective of beings that created this material and delivered it. So I believe in varying ways they is probably the most appropriate, but it's not in my habit. So I will keep trying to remind myself. Because I think it is important, that we don't just have masculine pronouns for, authority and for wisdom and that sort of thing. In fact, I think actually, this kind of perfect creation of wisdom, it is this unification of the masculine and feminine creative principles that exist throughout creation. And so they have to come into union with each other. Okay, let's go to another paragraph. This is kind of like the big picture, right? He says, my beloved friends, you all float in a safe cloud of divine consciousness, and you are nurtured by divine love, whether you know it or not, feel it, or experience it. Your total consciousness knows it. Your fragmented consciousness does not. As you connect with your inner being, you will know this to be true. The big picture. Life, in its broader sense, is greatly concerned with the process of spreading divine consciousness and reuniting apparently disconnected aspects. There are many different terms that designate this process. It is often called the divine plan, the evolutionary plan, or the plan of salvation. It is an ongoing process, a ceaseless movement, a flowing energy that seeks to spread out and at the same time to unify itself. In this spreading out, the connection is sometimes apparently lost. So the movement is one of spreading out and moving back to its source for reunification, forever advancing in this back and forth flow. Creation is the attempt of divine reality to fill the void with life and being. Fragmented consciousness is a result of the total consciousness spreading and filling every nook and cranny, but to the point that it thins itself out and the connection is lost, right? So this came from lecture 216. We are a conglomeration of consciousness with a spiritual mission to integrate all of these consciousnesses within us. Consciousness permeates the entire universe and creation. It permeates everything that exists. Every particle of matter contains consciousness. Aspects of consciousness float around in the universe. Every trait familiar to human understanding, every attitude known in creation, every aspect of personality is just one of many manifestations of consciousness. Every manifestation that is not yet integrated into the whole needs to be unified and synthesized into one harmonious whole. Disharmonious and destructive aspects of consciousness are in a state of separation. So when we talk about, being a conglomeration of consciousness with a spiritual mission to integrate them, I think I want to just highlight that because, again, we often are confused, like we are taught that, because we have this one body, we're this one being. And yet inside of us, we notice all kinds of different responses. I mean, I notice, like, depending on who I'm speaking to, I respond uniquely, to them. And certain people draw out certain aspects of me, other people draw out other aspects. And, they are often quite different, right? There's also, just ways that certain life experiences, trigger us into our pain body states, right? Whereas that's not our normal state, perhaps, or maybe we are kind of normally always in a pain body state. And what would be, the change would be occasionally we, feel excited, we feel joy, we feel something good about, what's happening in our lives in this moment. And so there's ways that in shamanic understanding, like, we are a bag of beings and everything has consciousness and is a being, and so are all of our feelings, our thoughts, our, all of these things are in a sense forms in the astral level that have varying levels of, consciousness. So like the guide is saying, every particle of matter contains consciousness, and matter doesn't have to just be physical matter. It can be our subtle body matter. So our thoughts and our emotions are also part of this matter. So aspects of consciousness float around in the universe, right? And then, it's kind of like they also are in the universe of our own field, our own energy field, those that are connected with us. But oftentimes where we have a certain aspect of consciousness that magnetizes or attracts other aspects of consciousness. And so that's where, these feelings that we have or these thoughts that we have can sometimes become, like feeling like we're being onslaughted from outside of us or possessed in some way or whatever, because I think there is an accumulation of that energy within us that comes from magnetizing external aspects of that same thought, from that same feeling, that same energy. And the good news about that is that it helps us get more conscious of it, right? It wakes us up a little more. when we don't know what it is, we think it's just us, or we don't understand how and we are contributing, then it can get confusing and difficult. But there's a way that, the guide is sort of calling us to begin to recognize that everything is consciousness, and that the disharmonious and destructive aspects of consciousness, can be healed, can be worked with. So he says, they say positive strengths and constructive aspects of consciousness are always harmonious parts of the whole, enriching and expanding the entire unified consciousness. So I think you might be able to feel that, what you have within you that's good. It's kind of spontaneous, it's natural, it's like when you're not covered up by something else, or blocked, it's just there. And, is there in this intuitive and natural way. And so this is what we're hoping to do with our entire being, right, is unify it in this way. And then according to its nature, each aspect of consciousness has its own characteristics, its own vibratory movement and frequency rate, its own emanations of color, scent, and tone. So, like there's some aspects that are more evolved, more harmonious, more in alignment and peace than others, right? And so it's noticeable, and we can learn to work with these essences in their vibratory experiential level, which I find, is more useful than trying to work with them from the story and the history and, the thought forms around it. So, I'm very happy that the path work, kind of keeps pointing us to our experiential experiences, right, where we can notice these different vibrations, frequencies, emanations, within us. And for me, a lot of times it's just that I notice my body is contracting instead of relaxed. And, there's various parts that, might feel pressure or intensity or something like that. And so it's not like these aspects are, completely, like I'm seeing it only as frequency. I'm getting it more as a sense, a felt sense. And so I work a lot with sort of tuning into the felt senses of all of these aspects of our beings. So it is the task of each human being in each incarnation to synthesize, unify, and assimilate these various aspects of consciousness. So this is our one personal task, right, is to take and unify and assimilate all aspects of ourselves. And you may notice, that there's a lot of you that you are at war with, or are unhappy within yourself, or judging yourself, or, maybe in very subtle ways, just criticize and wish that you could do better. But, any kind of sort of observation that is coming not from our open, curious, compassionate state, but is coming from sort of the inner critic, like a slightly or greatly kind of focus that is looking for the problem, is critical, doesn't like what it's finding, is reacting already. And so when that happens, that's another part, that's another being within us. It's really not our essential nature. And so it also needs integration. Okay, so choosing the sacred wound and soul dent before incarnation. When the real self takes on a task before it goes into an embodiment, it chooses to take certain aspects of consciousness along with it, if I may put it this way. On the path, you are helped to fulfill this task, which your real self understood, which is to bring unification between the disconnected aspects of your consciousness, and also to refine, re-educate, and purify these divergent aspects. Your ego, which is your active, determining outer consciousness. So we're not getting rid of the ego in this aspect of it. It's like there's a positive adult ego that is this one that is our active, determining outer consciousness that can choose to seek an understanding of these connections, or if not so positive and mature, it can, work to evade it. Your ego consciousness is the borderline between the inner light world and the outer void. So, as I said, when the human mind becomes entangled in the partial reality of three-dimensional consciousness, it can easily forget the task. Only through a struggle can it be reawakened to the greater consciousness. I might also add here that human beings receive a great deal of spiritual guidance and support in this. But when the disconnected mind forgets the greater truth of being, the conscious ego self temporarily identifies with those aspects needing re-education and purification. It then loses a sense of its real identity. This extremely painful state comes about only when pride, self-will, and fear are allowed to rule the consciousness. So that's very important, because you will always find, in this voice, um, of identification with not the real self. You'll find that there's aspects of pride, self-will, and fear that are involved, and that we're, working to trust and surrender into sort of the what is, and learn from it without sort of crucifying ourselves in the process. And then, of course, if we're not going to crucify ourselves, we're usually looking for the other guy, who's at fault, who's to blame. So all of that is part of what we're working to purify and, find a deeper level of self-responsibility for, that is not just, saying, oh, it's all your fault, if it's not their fault. There's something bigger going on here, something way, way bigger. So the moment you have exposed, owned, and realistically evaluated the negative aspects that you had exclusively identified with, and therefore struggled against seeing, this shameful isolation ceases, and aspects are seen for what they are, simply aspects of the total self. So when we identify, with our badness in some way, right, and we may be resisting it or fighting it or arguing about it, but if we're doing that, we have essentially identified with it, and we're trying to struggle to, disidentify, but that doesn't happen that way. It has to happen by this acceptance, and in this process of integration, by exposing, owning, realistically evaluating all of these places, and with love, with compassion, with self-understanding, which brings great wisdom, right, for yourself and for others. So it's trauma that often sets up this isolation in any given lifetime, or even, we bring it in for past lifetimes. But this is also seen as a kind of magnetizing of experience by the laws of consciousness. And self-responsibility requires self-awareness, which requires self-acceptance, right? So where there's judgment, we will bury our heads in the sand, because we don't want to face and see anything, like hostile towards our own deepest self, our own inner being. And there's no real reason ever to be that way, although as humanity has, traversed this particular stage in its evolution, it has definitely found this to be some kind of form of, collective education, to develop this inner self-corrector. The guide has some very interesting things to say about how all of this happens as well. So we will hopefully get into that as we go forward. It's, I think, getting close to time to wind up. So there is more of this, and we will probably continue in our next session in a couple of weeks. If I get a chance, I might go next week as well. But most likely it'll be in 2 weeks. I'm running a retreat here and got lots going, lots of irons in the fire. Want to welcome you to come and enjoy the retreat. I have a brand new website up now, so please check out earthwalkways.com. And I think you'll find a little more understanding of what I'm offering, and can do individual sessions, doing some, group programs here, some ceremonial programs. So, yeah, uh, happy to do individual sessions as well, which is kind of a great way to begin to understand your own inner landscape a little better. Okay. Um, so I think we will sign off for today, and we'll catch up with everybody in a couple of weeks, if not before. So thank you again for being with me, and I hope that this is something that can be useful for people. I find that it has been, the way that I have navigated from a very lost and pain body self. I had bulimia. I was clinically depressed as an adolescent and young person. And it was when I found this path work that I began the healing, although I was a deep seeker way before then. But I was 34 when I found this material. And then I have found how it's also been developed in many, many other ways in our community now. So this material was, came in the 60s and 70s, and it was like this influx of light. And at the same time, much material came in from East Asia, all of these other places, native traditions came back out into conscious view. And so it was like this initial influx, and it's continuing and building and awakening our collective to these deeper truths, to these ways of navigating life, and coming back into balance with ourselves, with each other, and with all of nature. Okay, hope to see you again soon. Take care. Oh, I just remembered one other thing. I don't know. I am going to give this a try. Let's see if we've got it here. So I do have a SoundCloud and a bunch of just original music. So this is a little song by the Fairies for fall. Oh, I don't know if this is like good for music, so this may not be working, but summer comes to fall when the night grows long as day. Come and harvest is the call, for the year soon slips away. Summer turns to fall when the night grows long as day. Come and harvest is the call, for the year soon slips away. What will you let go of? What will you keep? What will you share? On what will you feast? What will you let go of? What will you keep? What will you share? On what will you feast? Remember, save your seed corn for to sow when comes the spring, and remember to give thanks for this harvest that God brings. Remember, save your seed corn for to sow when comes the spring, and remember to give thanks for this harvest that God brings. What will you let go of? What will you keep? What will you share? On what will you feast? What will you let go of? What will you keep? What will you share? On what will you feast? I missed a verse, so we'll try it again sometime. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.